Superclusters is where we demystify the secrets, stories, and tactics behind the money that moves the venture capital world. Welcome back, Superclusters fans, and today we have a really special episode. And each of our guests today need no introduction, having each been crowd favorites across the Superclusters seasons. And in many ways, this is the college reunion of Superclusters. So today we have Cawley, Ben Choi, and Jaclyn Freeman Hester. And if you're curious on each of their backstories before they found their way into the world of capital allocation, I would highly recommend tuning into Lisa's episode, Season 3, Episode 5, Ben's episode, Season 1, Episode 6, and Jaclyn's episode, Season 2, Episode 9, which we'll all include in the show notes below. But to give a really short introduction of each, Cawley is the Managing Director of Screendoor, an LP of GPs. Ben Choi is the Managing Director of Next Legacy Partners, a fund of funds dedicated to harnessing the power of venture capital for positive change. And then we have Jaclyn Freeman Hester, who is a partner at Foundry Group, which invests in both founders and fund managers across North America. So, the elephant in the room, what are we talking about? We are talking about firm building and succession planning. So at what point does a fund become a firm, and what does it mean to actually build a generational firm? What are the intangibles? What are the questions each of them ask to best understand if a GP is thinking long-term? And how do the best firms transition leadership to the next generation of partners? So I prefaced this at the beginning, but I want to talk about it now, which is what are the questions you ask fund managers to get a better sense if they have a long-term perspective? And what differentiates a great answer from a good answer?
Yeah, so there's two things that we look for when we're trying to test this long-term question. And it's an important part of how we get to know a partnership, a firm, either in the first meeting or over time, honestly. And it's a combination of two extremes. Do they have long-term vision? And is that long-term vision rooted in the nitty-gritty details? So vision and details. So a question that we like to ask on vision is, describe your partnership 3 funds from now. Just like 3 funds, which is 6 to 10 years from now, depending on the firm. What does your partnership look like? It's far enough out that they can't name the person, the new partners, but they can talk about their aspirations and what that might mean for the firm and the practice and the strategy. Because to us, the atomic unit of value in a venture firm is the partner, and you build a firm around the partnership. So describing the partnership is kind of a way to describe a different kind of firm they want to be through the lens of that atomic unit, the partner. So that's one favorite question. Another question we'll ask to test sort of how in the details they are about their partnership today, as an indicator of how they think about their long-term partnership is, if we get multiple partners in a room together, we'll ask them, pick one of your partners and tell us what their superpower is, and just go around the room and just describe your partner's superpower. And again, it's a way, obviously, do they know each other, but more, do they see each other through the lens of how they complement each other? And oftentimes the way they describe it is not just a superpower, but it's a strength that complements the others in the room.
Okay.
That's a way to get at, are they thinking about building a partnership and not just hiring a person or deploying capital, all those things. And then one other question on nitty gritty and details is, but still in the long-term context, is take a portfolio construction model. And I'll often ask, after they describe the strategy, this number of investments, this average check, this much ownership, reserves, then I'll say, step back from that. What does it look like for when this fund is successful?
Yeah.
Whatever number that is, whatever multiple it is, what will the largest winner in your portfolio look like? And some GPs are, especially when they're just getting started, just looking for good deals, but they haven't done the really simple math of, okay, if I'm going to write this size check in this size fund, I need to have this many $1 billion outcome for my largest company to drive this size outcome of my fund. And it's just arithmetic that, a third or fourth grader can do, but you just get caught up in, and it's so very, nobody wants to say, well, I'm going to invest in today in a company that's going to be worth $5 billion. but actually that's what we're all banking on. So if they haven't done that math, that's a telling thing too, that they're hoping, but hope's not a strategy.
Right. They can't purely brag about, I will get into unicorns, if they don't know how unicorns are actually going to impact their portfolio.
That's right. And the reason why that I kind of came to that question over the years is we've worked with and spent time with a lot of especially pre-seed and seed stage investors who have incredible relationships and access in their portfolio to unicorns, right? To these companies that are worth $1 billion or more. And but there's always this kind of record scratch when you kind of talk about the companies they're involved with and then see the performance. And it's almost always because they're, the check size, the number of bets was too many. It's not so much ownership for small funds. It's just like, if you wrote 100 checks, then 100x gives you a 1x in your fund. You need a bunch of 100x's to get a multiple on your fund. And so oftentimes you'll have a 2-3x fund, even though they have a 100x investment in there. So seeing that math play out is either you do it through experience and they realize, oh, I need to concentrate more, or I need to write more of my, write earlier checks, whatever their learning is, or you just step back and do the math and you see it.
And then actually see this magnitude of some of these things, the enterprise value you need to return like a 3x net kind of thing, or a 4x net, is astounding. Like you almost see like the visible gasp of surprise when emerging managers actually do it, and they're like, oh
yeah, not so
I
good.
didn't expect this.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I love it.
Yeah, I do like to understand, a question you can ask if it's fund one is like, what does fund 3 look like? What does this look like at scale? What do you want this to be? Because I think we all know that often, fund 1 is a starting point. It's the same like when you're looking at talking to a founder, what the company is at seed is not the big vision that they're trying to build. But it's important that you understand that. It's not that you think it's 100% true, that you have to commit to it today, and if you veer from it, you have failed. We all know that things will change, and new firms are startups in themselves. But I think it's really important to understand what people value, what drives them, how they define success for themselves and for their firm, and then to make sure that if there's a partnership, that partnership is really aligned around it. And so we do ask those questions. And again, it's not because we're underwriting fund 3 at fund 1 and we want to know what it is, and we're only going to stick with, I think that we are different from an LP perspective, given we were writing smaller checks. Part of what we were doing from deal flow, like it was for deal flow. This is different than larger institutions who don't want to underwrite a single fund. Like that doesn't work for them and want to be able to write a bigger check over time, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to be transparent in the thinking, but I think also like you should do the thing that makes sense for you. Yeah. And not, yes, you have to listen to the market, but it doesn't mean, and I see people bending over backwards. Well, this LP said that they would only invest if we're 100 million and we were going to do 50. So we're going to put 100 million on the cover. And I'm like, well, that's dumb because you're not going to be aligned with that LP. And they don't, you should do the thing that you think you're great at versus trying to fit into everybody else's thing. Again, I understand that like there's not capital flowing and that you've got to adjust to markets, but I think you also have to be thoughtful about where you can be great and what your lane is. So we definitely want to understand it. We do want to understand, especially from solo GPs, hey, do you think you're going to be adding a partner? What does that look like? I think the other question that's important beyond what are you trying to build is, and we think about like, does that fit with this person and their strategy and what we think that they could be great at? Not just what are you trying to build, but then how do you get leverage? Because if you're a solo GP or you're a single person, even if you're partnered, you're 2 people, and how do you use the resources and the network and the community that you've created for yourself and get leverage out of it so you can do your absolute best work? And so those are some of the things that we're thinking about.
This might be a silly question, but what's a smart way to think about leverage, or like how one might tease up an answer about leverage?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of going sort of bottoms up. What is the job to be done, right? You got to source deals. You have to win those deals, and kind of get them done. Then you've got to manage them. Well, I would say source, pick, win, because you have to choose from the sourcing. So source,
Yes.
filter, pick, win those deals, manage and help them both so that the investments are in the best position that you can possibly put them in.
Yeah.
In some ways, I think there is a limit to the effect that an investor can have on a company. A lot of the time, it's really like it's the team, but you do what you can to support the team. That can drive success, but then also adding value so that you can win the next deal. Like it's a bit of a flywheel, right? And so that you have a strong reputation for supporting, doing the right thing, being valuable, doing what you said you were going to do. And then you actually have to manage the fund, which is making reserves decisions, which can be really hard because you have a limited amount of capital to continue to work with some of these deals. Some of them will not be doing as well as others. In some cases, you have sort of an arbitrage view because you're inside the company. You might see something the rest of the market doesn't see, and you should leverage that information, to take an opportunity. And sometimes you're seeing that you don't think a company's doing well and you don't want to put more money into it, even if you have a reserve sitting there, and you have to make those hard decisions. You got to let things die. And so there is the portfolio management aspect to it. There's also the aspect of getting liquidity. And so depending on what stage you're at and when you invested and what the market looks like, you've also got to think about getting liquidity, where there are secondary options that might be something to think about. And so there's there's all of those pieces. And so if you think about all of those pieces, plus you have a company that exists that you have to manage from the operations and finance side of things. Do not fuck up capital calls. That's the one thing I always say. Don't fuck up the money. And so you've got to make sure that stuff's all done well. And that matters. And then over time, you're probably going to have some employees. Like you are a company. And so you have to make sure you're doing all of those things correctly. Part of the work that you do creates your brand, but there's probably marketing and a website and all of those things. And so if you look at the full boat from a bottoms up perspective of the work to be done, then you think about, well, where can I be great? And we want to invest in managers that have the self-awareness to understand that, and that can be thoughtful and creative around getting leverage. And so when I say getting leverage, I mean, are you going to have some operating partners that help you source or look at deals or help founders with different things that you're not great at? Are you going to have someone that helps with ops and finance because it's really time consuming? Someone's got to manage your outside fund administrator, just so everybody knows that's not a thing that manages itself, even if there is a firm that's doing it for you. Is that a place where you want to get leverage? Do you want to take board seats, or do you want other people to help take board seats for you? Or do you want to always have independence that you put in? Or do you want to have great relationships with co-leads or other folks that can be on the board so that you get comfortable there? Whatever the things are. And so that's how we think about getting leverage, and even leverage from your network, right? And are you doing that in an efficient way where you know who to call for what, and you've kind of planted seeds and helped people along the way so that they'll help you back, whatever it is. And so sometimes it's systems, sometimes it's junior help, sometimes it's peer help, sometimes it's outsourced help, but thinking about how can you get yourself to where you're spending 80% of your time on the stuff that you're great at and the stuff that really matters to drive returns.
Out of the top three, so you would have sourcing, picking, winning, managing portfolio, top three priorities of each to be really excellent in those respective areas. And you would circle the things that you're really good at, and that's your 80-20. The things that you're like neutral at, you're like, okay, you're like a B plus or so, you would hire junior talent against them. And then for things that you're like horrible at, you're like, I need to hire senior talent against these.
I haven't thought about it from sort of with that type of framework. And I don't think it's necessarily that, I'm not sure I'd put it that way. I would think about how can you limit, like, to me, it's always like get the most out of the least amount of people.
Okay.
Because as I mentioned, especially if you're a solo GP and you're managing, but like either way, I don't think more bodies solves it. I think getting like high leverage from a smaller set of resources is better. Yeah. So the things that you're like not great at, I think it depends on like, what is it about it that, why are those in that category? Is it, I'm actually pretty good at this, I just don't want to spend time on it? that might be something where you could have a junior person that has some level of experience in that space, and where you're comfortable that you can oversee them because you know what good looks like and you know what it should look like. You just don't want to spend your time doing it. It could also be things that you're great at that just don't have high ROI. And you have the capacity to actually manage somebody into doing that job. I have actually talked to a number of folks recently who have told me how painful all of the operations, legal, finance stuff is, how much time they spend on that they didn't realize how much time they would have to spend on that. And all I want to do is be doing deals and helping my founders. Yeah. And so I'm going to hire this super junior person who really loves startups, and they're going to come do all of that. And my response to that is, those things are really important. You seem like you don't want to spend any time on those things. And I'm not sure you're going to be the best at training that person. And especially like the person who loves startups and venture doesn't want to do those things, because just like you said, you thought that this job was all about meeting founders and investing and helping the companies. Yeah. And I have suggested on a number of occasions, and we have a version of this, I think you get like a lawyer or someone who's been in accounting or finance that's pretty senior. And I think that the amount that you will have to pay that person is so worthwhile compared to you trying to manage a junior person, even if it's a junior person that's fine with that work. Right. So there's somebody that I know, she's a solo GP. She's awesome. She knows what she's good at. She knows what she needs. Her co-founder and partner at her firm, who I think most people wouldn't necessarily know if you talked about her firm, is a pretty senior attorney who deals with all of that stuff. And it's not just about, somebody's doing that work. It's that you can actually delegate and feel comfortable that you don't really have to spend time on that because it's being taken care of in a way. Otherwise, you're still having to check the work. Like, you're still having to spend all that time. And so does that get you the leverage that you need? I think there are areas where there are certain types of things that like a junior person could be super helpful with and own. But I think more about like what things matter a lot that have to be done really well. And that's where you want senior talent if it's not an area where you want to spend time. So, we have a COO/general counsel who is, I would say, invaluable. We also have a CFO who is also invaluable. And we have a big firm and $3 billion under management, all of that. But if they were more junior people, I don't know that we would be getting the leverage that we need, because part of the leverage is the mind share. Like, I don't have to think about this stuff, and I don't have to worry about the quality because I know it's being done well, and it's being done by people who are going to do it a hell of a lot better than I am. And I think those things are worth paying for. Again, I understand like limited resources in smaller firms, but as I think about potentially building something myself, that's something I've been thinking a lot about, is like, what am I willing to pay for? Because I think the ROI is really high, both on getting my time and mind share back and that important work being done well.
It sounds like the return on investment at these excellent hires are not just the monetary cost, but just also the time cost and energy cost associated with that.
It's the type of thing where if you're just going to end up having to do it yourself, like the amount of time to clean up somebody else, to check and clean up somebody else's work versus if I had just done it myself, is a thing you have to think about. And then the other thing with just people who are really experienced in an area is there's also ROI in the creativity that comes with ideas that they have around doing things in a way that you wouldn't have thought about doing them because you're not focused there. And so, there are certainly benefits that are beyond just, hey, I don't have to do this stuff myself, and having other people that are going to do it not only just as good as I would do it, but a lot better.
Effectively the equivalent of like, if you stay awake at night, lose sleep at night over your companies, do you want someone to lose sleep overnight over like how to operationally build out an institution?
I don't want anybody to lose sleep. Sleep is incredibly important.
Sleep is incredibly important.
But yes, I only have so much sleep to lose, so I'd rather it be over that. And cleaning up messes can take so much more time than doing it right in the first place. And the number of people I have talked to that just have to deal with cleaning up messes of like, hey, my fund admin screwed something up, and at the end of the day, my LPs don't care that it was my fund like, it needs to get done right, and so it's on me to clean it up, and that takes time and energy away from other things, probably a lot more so than if someone had done it well. So I do think those types of folks are really worthwhile. And if you see firms that have created staying power, they have those people. And a lot of time they also have IR people, and they have that stuff dialed so that they can just focus on doing the investment work.
The world of AI, let's say the transcription software, they get you like 95, maybe like 98% there. But because of the worry of its inaccuracy, especially for niche topics, you have to go through everything again just to verify that the words in which they used are the words that you intended for it to use. And it's like, obviously AI is much cheaper for a lot of folks out there. It's the equivalent of hiring a AI tool internally in the firm. If you hire someone junior to do something and they get it like 95% of the way there, but that 5% of the last 5% requires you to go back and check and spend even more time just checking on that isn't creating leverage.
Exactly. And I think that is a major question for a lot of the AI that's out there is like, is there real benefit to it if you don't trust it? Yeah. And that's really what it's all about, is like, you have to be able to trust. I will say to the folks out there that want to take junior roles or that are in junior roles at venture firms or really anywhere, going the extra mile to make sure your work is quote unquote perfect, or that you have the best sort of output product that you can, and having a commitment to high quality, and not only saves your manager's time, but it builds incredible trust and credibility that can, I think, really fast track your trajectory, because they know you really care. They know you know how to do great work, and they know that they don't always have to check it. And the more that they don't always have to check it, the more they're going to give you, because they're going to start to weigh should I just do this myself so I make sure it gets done right, or can I hand it off? And so I think it's totally worth going the extra mile. I joke that, I was in law firms as a junior person, and so and people have been bankers and consultants and things. And I joke, like, if I hire someone, I don't really want to hire right out of school. I want to hire someone with a little bit of professional experience, and I want someone who's been yelled at. And I know that sounds like shitty, but like, I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to manage somebody. I don't want to have to triple check work. I want to be able to build trust, but it's like going and getting that professional experience somewhere, like even if it's at a startup or a venture firm, whatever it is, having someone have had oversight on you and pushing you to do excellent work and helping you understand why it matters. I mean, as an attorney, you kind of have to do perfect work because every word matters. Like, they're like, contracts can be read based on whether there was a comma or not. Years down the road when they're in litigation. And so I think just like high quality output can help you just gain so much trust and can really just kind of help show the world who you are.
That in and of itself is a mic drop moment. Hire junior people who had experience
being
yelled at.
I know it's terrible. I'll probably get a lot of flack for that on
but I think it makes
mental
a lot of
health,
sense.
but yeah. And when I say yelled at, I don't mean yelled at, because that's obviously not a productive way to manage people.
Yeah.
When I was leaving my law firm job, they were just like asking for feedback, and you never want to give feedback. But they were like, you're doing so well, or like kind of wanted to understand like why you like, what were some of the challenges or whatever. I'm like, it's funny to me that you say like, I'm doing so well. Every time I get comments back in any of my work, it's in all caps and red. Like, you might want to not do that. It's like, oh, that's just how my editor just defaults to that. And I'm like, well, that feels like being yelled at, like in red, in all caps and bold, right? And so, but I will say that the lack of tolerance for low quality work is really what I'm saying. And I want people who have been somewhere where it may not seem important, but that the quality of the work matters. And that, that goes against a lot of like, fuck it, ship it startup mentality. And like, the enemy of great, whatever it is. Like stop trying to do perfect work. What is it?
Yes. The enemy of perfect is always good. No, wait. Enemy of good.
No, it's like the enemy of good work is perfect. It's something like that. Yes. Is that like, it's okay if it's just good. And in a lot of cases that's true. But when I think about being given millions and hundreds of millions of other people's money, and it's not just the LPs that you're interfacing with, like those are the representatives for that pool of capital, but that's like someone's hard-earned pension. And just thinking about like we don't need to take ourselves so seriously, but take the work seriously. Like you're taking money that could be going to someone's scholarship or is someone's retirement fund that they worked really hard to earn, and you're putting that to work. And so just having respect for that. And I think that having that sort of shine through that, like, we care about doing really good work. And if we do really good work in the way that we're talking to our LPs or the way that we run capital calls or the way that we do our reporting, that translates into how we come to the table and doing diligence of working with founders and helping them and being board members, all of that.
So I think for me, there's a couple questions that all get at kind of the same answer. It's what's your right to win? Why are you going to be a founder and talent magnet? Why does the world need you as a firm? Why does the world need you as a VC? And how do you define success? And I think you'd be surprised how many people actually can't answer those questions with really thoughtful parameters, where like one of my favorite answers is when someone can draw on elements of maybe prior firms that they've been at, as opposed to just saying that they want to build the next X, like whatever, fill in the blank, ABC, X, whatever that would be. Like, for example, we hear people all the time, or even LPs that will ask and say, like, can you find me the next homebrew? If you are saying that you want to be like homebrew, you've just admitted that you're not that differentiated because you're trying to be more of the same. What's more interesting to me is when someone would take that and say, I'm going to draw on elements of that. I want this type of partnership, or I admire this type of portfolio construction. And here's what's going to be different about it, though, because it's me doing it, or it's me and my, the team that I've brought to this. And so I think, like, from the LP lens, you so often see folks that, they want to do emerging managers. Deep down, they just don't have the resources to cover the landscape. And so they end up being drawn to folks that are leaving, well-known brand name firms. And I think that's just like one profile of folks. And I think that they feel safer and more de-risked because they feel like they're getting, a portion of exposure that's going to look like that brand name firm because that investor came from there. And I think what actually separates really exciting managers from, mediocre, still wonderful people and probably hopefully great investors is someone that can say, I'm taking this piece from my firm that I learned. That was like, a ventures and apprenticeship business. So everybody is learning constantly all of the time. But, I'm going to take this piece that I learned from this firm. I really want to do this part differently, or I don't want to do this piece at all. Here's what I've learned from it. And I think that gives a much more holistic look into how somebody thinks, how they adapt, how they forecast. Because again, you can forecast all day long. And that's really important to have a vision because that's what's going to guide you forward. But you also have to recognize that your vision may not happen block by block exactly how you lay it out. And that's okay. That's not because it's wrong, right? Like there's that saying, just because it's difficult doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Or just because there's a change doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means that you're adapting to everything that's thrown at you. So all that's to say, I think the most interesting answers are folks that aren't trying to replicate something, but they're trying to replicate or draw on pieces of what they've experienced before, but make them better by way of their view on the world. Well, and I can think of like no firm that goes down in history because they hit their portfolio model assumptions, like target valuations and ownership on like 100% of the time, right? Like those things absolutely matter, but they only matter because they culminate in a manager's ability to be in the best companies. And at the end of the day, we can talk all the time about operations and legal and like diligence and fundraising. But if you're not in the best companies, if you don't have companies driving returns in your funds, then I don't know about your next fund.
So firm building is more than just an AUM, assets under management game, and it's more than just the number of partners at your institution. And in your mind, is there an inflection point that turns a fund into a firm?
Yeah, everyone I think is going to have a different definition of this. It's just like the same, everybody has a different definition of emerging managers, right? Like an emerging manager to one group is like a fund 0. For others, they're like, no, emerging manager means fund 3 and you have, multiple funds of track record and you've worked at 7 other venture funds. So I think it's all relative. So there's no right answer in my mind. My view on it is that you should actually be acting like a firm on day one. Like, what are you waiting for? Like, why are you not a firm? You are on paper in terms of like legal docs and a management company. And like, we can go into all the nuance there, but like, I think of it more like you're building your firm through different chapters. So it always exists. And yes, you may have one fund. You want to grow that into multiple funds over time to continue doing what you're doing. But you should be acting like a firm on day one as best as you possibly can. There's nothing to, like, there's no circle the date on the calendar and I'm going to become a firm at this point. And I think if you extract that out into the broader context, you're thinking, when do you turn into a brand that people know? And so a lot of that comes, do you care about your brand with founders? Do you care about it with co-investors? Is it with LPs? And those are actually three very different, trains of thought and brand building exercises that, again, you need to be starting on day one. And it's not going to go from 0 to 100 instantly. But at the end of the day, like, you should be doing everything you can, if that is your vision, right? If you do want to be considered a firm, considered a brand. And again, I think just because I say brand, that doesn't automatically mean you need to have large sums of AUM. Like, there's amazing brands that have been very, very, very consistent in terms of their fund size and AUM and team. So that's not to conflate, brand building and firm building with like an increase in volume of people in AUM. It's, how are you thinking about developing the strength of how people view you in the market?
What, if anything, do LPs often oversimplify about the firm building process, and what do LPs often overcomplicate?
So I think LPs, again, they also they're looking to fit this fund into their boxes of diligence. And that's much perhaps more conducive to managers that are in that established category. But just speaking specific to new managers and emerging managers, I often see this dialogue of well, I'll just wait and see how this develops. But what I think people should take a step back and realize is that by waiting to see how it develops on the outside, you're actually not participating in the very thing that is defining it potentially as that amazing venture alpha that it could be. And so if you're sitting on the sidelines until it's obvious, you've just missed that inflection trajectory and exponential growth. And everybody else, by the way, also thinks it's obvious at that point. And I think that bleeds into the number one question that sometimes I always think is so funny that people ask is, what are your other LPs doing? Because when you ask that question, the answer is actually completely irrelevant. It's just the wrong question to ask. Because if you're asking it because you're trying to make sure that there's viability of this continuing going forward, that's one thing, right? You're making sure that there's, quality folks around the table. The other side of it though, is that if you have an LP base that let's just say hypothetically is 30% endowments, 30% foundations, there's a sleeve of family offices, and the balance is high net worths and maybe other institutional investors. Even if you just take one category of that and say, I'll pick on the endowments for a minute, every endowment has different goals. They have different, they all have kind of the broad goal of their university system, but they all run a different type of portfolio, and they do it in a different way. And they try to hit their targets that they're, their returns that they're trying to achieve for their stakeholders, across different asset classes. And you may have one endowment within that category that's really over allocated in one area. You may have another one that is really under allocated to that same area. And so if you're asking what other LPs are doing, not to mention throw in leadership changes where people have different preferences on how to actually achieve their target returns, you're failing to understand that people make decisions about whether it's venture or a specific fund for very different reasons. Sometimes, yes, there's absolutely overlap. And you're looking at that as do they know something I don't? And that's why they made this decision. But oftentimes, they're not looking at a fund and saying, I didn't do this fund, so everybody else shouldn't, right? They may be look, I have a lot of fintech exposure, don't need any more. That's why this isn't a fit for me, but sounds amazing. Can't get it across though. So I think that's one thing that I think people oversimplify a lot is what's everybody else doing? Because everybody's doing things for different reasons. So I think too, fundraising, understanding, where you are with targets and minimum viable fund size and close amounts. I know I'm so often asked on the manager side of the table, what is the right number to close on if I'm going to do multiple closes? And I think it's important to have an option to do multiple closes because fundraising is a process. It's not a point in time that the heydays of it happening in 2 weeks is that's just not what venture is. It's a process because back to everything we've talked about here is it's about building relationships and learning and understanding people because the data points aren't on paper. The data points are the people. And so you can only collect those over a period of time. And some of what ventures is making a bet on what those future data points are going to look like.
As someone who, like, you've, and I mentioned this in our episode as well, when you've been a founder, you've been a VC, you've been an operator, you're now an LP, so you've literally collected all the infinity stones here. I'm curious. I'm curious, what, if anything, do LPs often oversimplify about the firm building process, and what do they overcomplicate?
I think we overcomplicate almost nothing as LPs.
Okay.
And this is a criticism myself, right? Where I'm an LP. And I think we oversimplify almost everything because by definition, we're the customer of the end product.
Right.
You know, we get fund returns and we get most excited when we actually have DPI, like distributions in our bank account or in our investor's bank account. Which means by definition, we're not seeing that the sausage making happened 10 years ago.
Right.
So we're so far away that we have the benefit and also the danger of looking back in history and saying, oh, they did these things, the few things we can see, and that turned into this. We keep on doing that and we keep on getting this. So I think that we oversimplify everything. We have heuristics we develop. We ask questions like, did they see them? Did they pick them? Can they win them? Do they add value? And can we translate those four things into, did they generate returns through good portfolio construction? But of course, there's a million things that are happening every single day to make all that happen that we have the privilege and also don't have the responsibility to work through. So I think LPs oversimplify everything about the firm building process, and that's okay. That's our job. We also get to see, because of that, we are boiling down lots of things into heuristics of activity and returns and results, and then we get to see that over multiple firms, and so we can have the benefit of pattern matching. But to get that pattern matching visibility, you have to be out of the details.
That's fair. You have the 10,000-foot view. That's
right. Yeah, and that's something that my partners and I, having come from the GP side, we have a lot of empathy, and oftentimes we feel like we don't have a lot of answers for them, but we can certainly walk the path with them and appreciate that we are oversimplifying. Like we're the LP. We're not. It's the same. I think and GPs have the same challenge, especially GPs who were founders. Their role is to be on the journey with the founders, but the founder is the hero of the story. Like the GP is the Gandalf, right? Is the wizard who's the wise advisor, and same thing. We're coming alongside. We're the wise advisor, but we're not the hero of the story in our business.
That's fair. I think going that Gandalf analogy, I think I've heard Mike Maples say on his podcast, Starting Greatness, where I think he calls the founder the Luke Skywalker and then the investor the Yoda.
Yes.
Both are powerful, but at the end of the day, episodes 4, 5, and 6, Luke Skywalker's the hero.
Yes. Frodo, Gandalf, Iron Man, and Nick Fury. Choose your.
Yes. Actually, when you were saying Iron Man, I was thinking Iron Man and Spider-Man. I don't know if we're going too deep in the Marvel analogy.
Well, you mean Iron Man to Spider-Man?
Iron Man to Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. That's right. In Iron Man, though, and Nick Fury's the boss. So it's not quite right. But who's his
guru? I think he, in the first movie, and not to go too much into pop culture here, but in the first movie, his first guru was his dad's accomplice, but then he turned out to be the villain. Spoiler alert. And
yeah.
I don't know if it's helpful as a hero. There, in some ways, like Captain America and Bucky. Bucky was like a wise friend to Captain America and helped pull him through tough moments. And then in the end, the Captain America became the first Avenger. But then Bucky went through obviously his own tropes, and I think they fleshed out that character as well. But nevertheless, I think in the first movie, you might be able to say Bucky in some ways was the wise advisor, albeit for a short period of time, for Captain America to end up becoming hero of the story.
It's the story of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And there's a version of it for GPs and building this topic of building a firm that will last the test of time.
Yeah.
It is a hero's journey. There is and it's a little bit more Fellowship of the Rings. It's more of a partnership than an individual, but there is a a journey that these firms go through, and it lasts. The arc is, I guess you can make a movie about one fund, but you need the trilogy to really appreciate the full story. You need the 3-book series.
I do agree.
And the books get into so much nitty gritty, super boring development of the history and the backstory. And that's all the stuff. Like LPs watch the movie, we don't read the book. How's that for the analogy?
Oh, that's so good. That is so good. Oh, okay. That's definitely going in a short somewhere. I know I'm still thinking about that, and I'm still letting it marinate in my mind because it is something that I'm going to revisit so much, and I'll give you complete credit for that.
It's okay. You should own it. You should always borrow. Not a good idea. Interesting ideas and make them better. You can fully own it as yours.
I'll own it, but if I iterate on it, I'll let you know. I'll come back to you and I'll let you know.
That I do want to know. I think we talked about LPs and how do LPs oversimplify or undersimplify. I think there is a similar pattern between established GPs and emerging GPs. I think a lot of emerging GPs, especially, we spend a lot of time with emerging GPs as part of our strategy. I think a lot of emerging GPs overcomplicate the firm building thing because ultimately, job number one as an emerging GP is to be a great investor. We want you to be a great investor that lasts the test of time. But if you're a mediocre investor that lasts the test of time, or a great investor that doesn't last the test of time, we prefer the second. We prefer the great investor that's a one-hit wonder over a mediocre investor that lasts a long time.
Right.
So I think a lot of GPs, emerging GPs, for great intentions, listening to this podcast, right? I imagine the podcast audience is a lot of, I imagine, Roelof Botha is not listening to this podcast. He's on the other end of it. But there are a lot of emerging ones, and I think because the question is you don't want to just do this once. You want to be great for a long time. But I think the reality is when you're getting started in venture, you first have to prove to yourself and the world that you're good. And then you can hopefully along the way, you can also invest into being good over the course of time. And then the flip side on established GPs, I think you can oversimplify where you just have to be good. We just have good investors, and you end up there are some firms that fall into the temptation of the rock star GP, and the firm is great over the tenure of that GP, but they don't cultivate junior talent. They don't invest into a culture beyond a person, and so the firm kind of oftentimes can last beyond that rock star because of the brand that they build, but they last as a mediocre firm, and that's probably our biggest challenge. As an LP, we have great access to these amazing firms who have amazing investors, and we have to kind of look out for, all right, do we have to get off this ride at some point because they haven't made the transition to the next partners, and the rock star is starting to, they always slow down before they tell you they've slowed down, and so we have to watch that.
For them, I think they always think about that transition point. I always is bad terminology for it, and I can only say this anecdotally by hearing from others. I haven't fully experienced it myself yet, which is they think about it post-mortem when it's too late, in the sense that, oh, I've already decided I plan to retire.
Yeah.
Now let me go find someone, instead of, yeah, I will retire one day, probably like 10 years into the future, or like 20 years into the future, but I do want to hire the next generation of GPs. And I think someone who does a remarkable job of this, at least communicating that to his team and thinking about that, like, and relaying that to his LPs as well, is Eric and Elizabeth and Sheehan at Hustle Fund. Because I'm not an LP in Hustle Fund or anything, but I've heard many a time when I've invited like Eric to a talk and all that, and he's like, actually, you should have this person on our team talk, because I really want this person to be the next generation partner, and I think she has so many like great insights to share. And he talks a lot about Haley on his team as well. So I deeply respect it, because not only do the LP see that, the team sees that, but also people outside in the ecosystem also hear that as well.
I think that's authentic to Eric and sort of his values, but I think it also is something that will benefit Hustle Fund for sure.
And I also realize we've gone a little tangent, so like this has taken longer than I expected, but I've enjoyed every second.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, all three of you, for sharing your thoughts here. I've been taking copious notes myself, and I know this is going to be an episode I revisit a lot. So, not to be cognizant of time, Thank you so much. We'll see you all soon. I want to give a special shout out to today's sponsor, Alchemist Accelerator. Backed by the likes of Coastal Ventures, Mayfield, Salesforce, just to name a few, Alchemist is the top B2B startup accelerator that's been around since 2012, backing founders from day one. And if you've been around for 12 years and running laser focused only on one industry, you build this incredible set of flywheels, and positive feedback loop is absolutely insane. We back the best enterprise talent who go on to change the world in which we live in, who then come back to their hometown, coach, and mentor the next generation of world-class enterprise talent. And don't take it just from me. Alchemist has backed the likes of LaunchDarkly, Rigetti, Privacera, MoEngage, FarmWise, just to name a few, many of which who have come back as mentors and coaches for the current classes of Alchemist. If you're curious and want to get more involved in the Alchemist ecosystem, check out alchemistaccelerator.com/superclusters. That's an S at the beginning and S at the end, and we'll include the link in the show notes below. Till next, stay awesome. Hey Superclusters fans, David from Post here, and if you're tuning in from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts find your ear, it'd mean the world to me if you left a review. For those from the YouTube universe, let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and it'd mean a lot to me if you could share this episode with just one other person who'd get a kick out of today's topics. I'm on the road to publishing to at least 100 episodes of Superclusters, so every comment, question, review helps me make this experience more helpful, exciting, and fun for you. And lastly, I want to share a quick disclaimer. The views expressed in this episode are for informational purposes only and are solely the views of myself and the guest alone. They are not representative of Alchemist Accelerator. None of the views expressed herein constitute legal, investment, business, or tax advice. Any allusions or references to funds or companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment recommendations. Consult a professional investment advisor prior to making any investment decisions. And that's all from me. See you on the next.